I'm Jim Check. You're watching Kelowna now. We had so much technical difficulty, I didn't even know we were starting yet. Good morning, Ian. How you doing?
I'm doing swell. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. So let's get into it here. The Canadian Armed Forces no longer automatically disqualifying applicants because of certain medical conditions. Obviously, they need more people.
Well, I mean, this is happening. This is happening in like Europe as well. It's not just Canada, but it is a strange one, isn't it? So they're effectively lowering the standards. That's what that means.
Yeah.
They're sort of the stand because they used to automatically refuse people that had allergies, ADHD. The other one was anxiety, and now they're actually going to look at them. They're going to test them, see what they're about. But it just seems to me if you're really struggling to recruit people, lowering the standards maybe isn't going to be
Yeah.
the best bet, really.
And
Maybe increase
and
the
I
rewards, increase the value of the job.
yeah, and I would think in this day and age with all the inflation and everything, almost everybody has anxiety.
Well, that's the thing. Anxiety is ballooned, hasn't it? I mean, it's now in the younger generations. It's like it blows your mind. I can't actually remember what the percentage is, but it's an enormous percentage. It's like a huge chunk of the Generation Z and the Alpha or whatever.
Also, maybe that's a lot to do with people just wanting to prescribe stuff because I do talk to a lot of people that are on a lot of pharmaceuticals for anxiety and things like that. And um, yeah, I mean that is a weird thing. But yeah, like I think the armed forces are underpaid and then also treated poorly when they return. Like you have veterans sleeping on the street and stuff like that. They shouldn't have to work again. You're going to lay
Yeah,
your
well,
life down the line.
it should be a very, very attractive job because it's possibly the most important job in the whole country. So it should be as attractive as, getting a job at Goldman Sachs or something like that, like Mark Carney did. Like a gold-plated. It should be like, wow, good for you. Like you're in
But
the
again,
forces. Like, wow,
uh, the
congratulations,
current
kind of thing.
the current government has not treated the military very well. Again, we talked about like like even the sleeping bags are subpar, and like, like everything's been subpar. Our equipment's subpar. Everything is subpar. So the military is treated like you were saying, like like we're a post-nationalist state that we don't really care about our military because we figure somebody else will deal with that, and we don't need a military.
Yeah, and you can you can kind of see what a society prioritizes by, looking at a few measurements, and one of them would be just just have a look on the federal government's jobs website, or even like the BC government or any provincial government, and look at the kind of money they pay, and look at how seriously they take those jobs, and then compare that to the armed forces, to kind of this military. It's the balance is completely wrong, and there's a privileging of white collar bureaucratic jobs, that the government pays for, and it's to the detriment of the whole country, I would say. And one of the consequences of that is barely anybody wants to join the military, and who can blame them?
Well, the deciders of the ones that keep their hands on the purse are the ones that deciding who gets the money, and they seem to have decided that they should get it first.
Yep, and also if you want to be cynical, it's votes as well, isn't it? Because the forces represent a very small number of people, whereas bureaucrats, public servants, that's a very large chunk of people, and they do vote, and they have unions, and they make their voices heard.
A prominent trans activist wants Canada to update its travel safety guidelines for the United States and wants guidance for people going into the US.
Yeah, this person says like has a passport that just says X instead of male or female, and is very, very worried that maybe the US would just, is going to ban people in that situation, not going to let them in because of this new executive order from the Trump administration, and so as a consequence, are calling for there to be a travel warning. Like how there's a travel warning if you want to go to Iran or something like that. There'll be a big warning saying, don't be silly, kind of thing. Like you should, it'll say, be careful, you might be abducted, there might be a terrorist attack, blah, blah, blah. So they want something like that attached to the US saying not necessarily a safe place for transgender people.
Um, and then we talk more about the US. Like they again, this is a story out of Blacklock. So like they're the Trudeau government is going to retaliate with dollar for dollar and even ketchup. And I mean, I think we're missing the point. I know you and I are going to have a bit of a discussion on this. We're missing the point as to what the purpose of the tariffs is. We're going to listen to this clip before we talk. We're going to listen to this clip here, an exchange from on Fox News with Ted Cruz here. We're just going to see if we can get it to play, and you can take me off the screen as well.
That by February 1st, you could see a 25% tariff on both Mexico and Canada. Now, I thought he would have a little more time to negotiate with them over, border control and their help and military and fentanyl and declaring, we're going to declare the cartels to be terrorists. But were you surprised that in just a couple of weeks he might be slapping tariffs on? Let's start with Mexico. You're from Texas. It's your neighbor.
Why don't you put me back on the screen? Sorry. I didn't want you to cut the video off. I wanted you to turn it up. Can you put it back?
What do you make of that, Senator?
Well, look, I understand his threat of tariffs in the context of what he did in the first administration, which is he threatened the same tariff, 25% on Mexico, unless they help secure the border. That's how we got the Remain in Mexico agreement. That's how we produced historic low illegal immigration, the lowest rate in 45 years. And so I hope and believe that his plan is not to put the tariff in place, but rather to use that as leverage to get both Mexico and Canada to cooperate. That may prove wrong, but my hope and the advice that I've given the Canadian government and that I would give the Mexican government is come to the table with as aggressive as humanly possible you can be to actually secure the border. Deliver on that, and I think the better outcome for everyone is not to put those tariffs in place, because we suddenly have partners who are securing the border and addressing the crisis the whole country's been facing.
And then there's that other one there from a tweet from Stephen Taylor, and it says Trump says it's all about fentanyl. Says that fentanyl coming through Canada is massive. If you could put that tweet up there, Rommel. No. Nope. Next one. Nope. There you go. There you go, Ian. Trump says it's all about, Ted Cruz says it's all about the border. Trump says it's all about the fentanyl coming across the border. We're going after ketchup and different things, dollar for dollar trade. And also our Premier Eby from BC is saying that, he's telling people not to go in the U.S. to spend money. And I would say not to go in the U.S. to spend money because we can't afford it, because our dollar is not very good.
Yeah, I'm sure that a lot of people would agree with you there. But I mean, as for the fentanyl, if it really is about the fentanyl, and also the millions of people, that's what he said, millions of people are coming in from Canada. If that really is the case, then I would say present the evidence, because there is none. There is no evidence. Not to the US. I mean, this is from the US's own statistics. It's simply not happening. It's a figment of his imagination. It is not happening. So how do you negotiate with somebody that exists on a different plane of knowledge? I just don't. I don't. It's like trying to negotiate with an alien or something like that. It's like the terms of reference are not there. So how do you even how do you even begin to have a conversation with somebody that invents things like that?
I would say we are starting to address it. I mean, we do have Black Hawk helicopters now supposedly flying the border and that. And I do believe that we need to strengthen our border, and our ports, definitely. We've talked about this in the past. Our ports there aren't inspecting enough of the sea cans that are coming in. Like, I think that percentage is lower than 5%. And they do say a lot of that stuff coming through is coming through those sea cans. And we did see, even in our own backyard here in British Columbia, one of the largest fentanyl manufacturing labs right here in our backyard in Falkland.
Totally, yeah. But to go back to the main point, that's chicken feed in comparison to Mexico. It's absolutely chicken feed. It's not even like I said to you earlier, this isn't even a top 200 priority for the Americans or concern for the Americans in reality. So he's using it to get something else. And I think, as I said again to you earlier, I think he wants the trade deficit. It's in Canada's favor now. I just checked, $40 billion last year in favor of Canada. That's all because of oil. I think he looks at that and he says, I want that to be the other way around. So how can I make this happen? And one of the ways that he's choosing to do it is to try and associate Canada with the reason he won the election, which is the southern border with Mexico. So he's trying to rob in Canada with that, even though that's nonsense, absurd, ridiculous thing to do. But he's trying to get them into the same category so that he can persuade the American people to come along with him while he bullies Canada into changing the trade deficit in the favor of the United States. That's my theory.
Pretty easy to bully Canada right now when we don't really have leadership going on here, so we need an election.
Well, it's easy to bully. It's easy to bully Canada when you're the United States, I would say, for sure, because they are so much more powerful, so much richer, and we're so dependent on them, as the likes of David Eby, First Nations leaders, Doug Ford, Trudeau, as they all now seem to realize, like 25 years too late, we're completely dependent on the United States. And the United States is not a trustworthy partner. They're no longer to be trusted. So, in a way, we dug our own grave.
Let's move on to Pierre Poilievre. Says he vows to shrink the federal public service. Work isn't getting done.
Yeah, well, he said it's too big, and I doubt you're gonna meet many people who would disagree with that, other than people that work for the federal government, really. But what another interesting thing that he said was that he doesn't mind working from home. He says that that's fine as long as you get the job done. He doesn't care. Whereas
That's in
sorry, go ahead.
contrast to Trump when he said you got to get back to work and you got to work from the office, where Poilievre saying we need to shrink government, but you're okay to work from home. I mean, everybody's been complaining about the size of government. We've been bloating the public sector for the past 9 years. It's one of the biggest growing sectors in Canada.
Well, it's become like a kind of jobs program, hasn't it? It's become almost like a welfare scheme for the middle class and for the graduate, like the university educated class. And you can't run a welfare scheme like that forever, and you certainly can't keep growing it, indefinitely. So this is just what Poilievre is talking about is kind of a swing of the pendulum, really, and a kind of it seemed inevitable when in the Trudeau years, particularly during and after COVID, when all of these jobs were being added. It just seemed inevitable that they would be removed as well, because that's kind of the nature of things. That's how it always works.
Yeah, we have the same problem in British Columbia. Like our biggest, fastest growing sector again is the public sector.
Indeed, and that keeps happening. It's every new set of data that we get. It's the same story, isn't it? More public service jobs and not so many private sector jobs. But Eby has said, he's also said that in the context of these tariffs or the threat of the tariffs, he said like we're going to have to go back to basics from the perspective of the government, and we're going to have to like spend a lot less on administration, because things could potentially get really tight if this tariff comes in to effect. So I think it's kind of like it's like the hangover, isn't it? The Trudeau years were almost like the party spending years, and now this is kind of like now the bill is due and we have to pay it. So
there's an old saying: the bigger the party, the bigger the hangover.
Yeah, although I would say it wasn't all that much of a party, but certainly if you went for the provincial or federal government, maybe it did feel like a party. I don't know.
And then another one of Trump's orders, he's suspending or canceling the travel plans for refugees who have already been cleared to resettle in the U.S. He just says that the U.S. doesn't lack the ability to absorb large numbers of migrants right now.
Yeah, no, he said they do lack. They don't have it, basically. Well, they said they don't have the resources to provide for migrants and particularly refugees without affecting, I'm paraphrasing here, but without affecting the quality of life of American citizens. And that sounds a little bit familiar to a Canadian audience, I would imagine, because we've certainly seen quality of life decline here, and numerous banks and economists and
access to healthcare, rent costs, housing costs, everything, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And the Americans, I guess, have been complaining of the same kind of thing, and they've chosen to do this. But this is an interesting one, because just thinking back to Trump 1, as everybody's calling it, he took a lot of blows. He took a lot of hits, didn't he, over the kids in cages thing and all that sort of stuff at the border. Like, he took a lot of hits over that, and it did a lot of damage, I think, to his standing. Whereas this is Trump 2 is a completely different proposition, isn't it? So it's going to be very interesting to see what the reaction to this is, and whether or not it actually does damage to his approval rating or whatever.
And this is really big news out of the U.S. And I talked about this quite a bit in the past, that they're promoting this golden age in the United States in investment. And prior to him even taking office, he had met with the CEO of SoftBank, Masa, and he promised to bring $100 billion to the United States and 100,000 jobs. Trump asked him at that press conference to bring $200 billion. I'm going to play this clip here for you, if we can.
Infrastructure project by far in history, and it's all taking place right here in America. These world-leading technology giants are announcing the formation of Stargate. So put that name down in your books, because I think you're going to hear a lot about it in the future. A new American company that will invest $500 billion at least in AI infrastructure in the United States, and very quickly, moving very rapidly, creating over 100,000 American jobs almost immediately. We want it to be in this country, and we're making it available. I'm going to help a lot through emergency declarations, because we have an emergency. We have to get this stuff built. So they have to produce a lot of electricity. But it's technology and artificial intelligence, all made in the USA. Beginning immediately, Stargate will be building the physical and virtual infrastructure to power the next generation of advancements in AI, and this will include the construction of colossal data centers, very, very massive structures.
Thank you. Well, Mr. President, last month I came to celebrate your winning and promised that we will invest $100 billion. And you told me, oh, Masa, go for 200. Yeah. Now I came back with 500. Because this is as you said yesterday, this is the beginning of golden age of America. This is one great example, I think.
I mean, we've been talking about that for a while. That's a $500 billion that SoftBank is just investing, and that included in that press conference was Oracle, and also Sam Altman from OpenAI. They were talking about Larry Ellison from Oracle was talking about. You can go watch the full clip on Fox. Was talking about how they believe that they can cure all cancers with their early detection with AI and all this stuff that they're doing. It's some pretty exciting stuff in there. And this is why I say we're entering into an age of abundance. But all this investment right now is flowing into the United States. And right now you hear a giant sucking sound out of Canada because of our environment. Like recently, our liberal MPs are talking about a resource sector, which they have not talked about for 9 years. They tried to suppress them, including, like we had Karina Gold there. There's a tweet out there from her saying we need to landlock Alberta, and then Stephen Jabot saying that we're not going to invest in roads, not even roads, in the second largest nation in the world. We don't want to invest in roads, and these are the people that want another 4 years to do this. And basically, one of the key points in what Donald Trump was talking about there is energy. And guess what Canada has a lot of, whether that's hydroelectric, whether that's LNG and gas. Canada and oil and gas. Canada is one of the leading energy nations in the world. And He's reenacted the Keystone Pipeline. So like a lot of the stuff I think is more rhetoric and stuff like that, because he knows he needs Canada. He needs Canada for the energy, and that part is so evident. Whether that's the electricity from the hydroelectric dams out of Quebec or British Columbia, or the oil and gas that he gets out of Alberta, Canada is a great partner for the United States. If they want to accomplish all this stuff, they need Canada really badly, and that's what we should be talking about, not catch up. That we have the energy you need to move into this new world. Like that's the key point. And that's, if I was Trudeau or Poilievre or anybody, I would be talking about the energy that we have, and that we're a great partner for that fit, not talking about catch-up tariffs and nonsense things about not going to the US or retaliating against red states. That's just silly nonsense and makes us look weak.
Yeah, well, I would say in defense of our valiant Prime Minister that he has actually said that a number of times about energy. And he did say that recently when he was in Montebello, when he popped down to update the public on the latest situation. He did say, if you want a golden age, you need us, and we're here.
But I do want to like put an asterisk there beside that, because the Liberal government has suppressed our natural resources. So now they're talking about how they need to utilize them, but they're just coming up with a different way to impose the carbon tax, and we're going to get to that later, where Stephen Jabot is talking about different ways to do the carbon tax.
Yeah, but I think this $500 billion investment and all the rest of it, like the data center, I think this sort of highlights something else, not just about maybe not unleashing our resources as we should have done. I think it highlights something else, which is sort of like just to get approvals, just to build something it's like an odyssey. It's like somebody at the peak of their life, like a 40-year-old or something like that, could theoretically spend the best years of their career, all of their life's energy, just to try and get a project approved in Canada. And that's their contribution to the world. That's how difficult it is. And if you're trying to compete with the United States, and as Trump has said, he's just gonna, if you come in with loads of money, over $1 billion, he's just going to open all the doors for you, and he's going to make sure everything gets approved very quickly. So if you're trying to compete with that country, and then Canada's like, oh, have you consulted this environmental specialist? You know, what about this frog that lives in this pond over here? Like, that's going to be about a 10-year consultation. And have you asked this First Nation? But what about the other First Nation that also claims it? And then like different ranks of chief and so on. It's kind of like, how on earth can we compete with them if they're fast tracking projects? And for us, it's like 30 years to build something, you know?
And that's what I just said. It's like that giant sucking sound. If you have a lot of capital, where are you going to deploy it? And that's where Canada sits in a really precarious position right now. Like even the capital that Canadians have, they're going to deploy it in the United States. They're going to invest with the Sam Altman. And this is just Sam Altman and Larry Ellison. Microsoft's investing in a huge data centers. We talked about this earlier. There's these huge nuclear plants going online in the US because they're going to create data centers. Microsoft is a data center. Amazon a data center. Like this is X already has a huge data center in Texas. Like all these major companies, Palantir, are all going to need energy, and a lot of it, and also an ability to create and build, like you said, without a lot of red tape, and do it with speed.
Yeah, and you know, we have to also, you know, they're not just doing this. Like Jagmeet Singh, for example, might say, "Oh, you know, they only want to do this so that they can amass more money. These billionaires and these oligarchs and so on." But another way to look at it is, if you want to grow, if you want your economy to grow, and you want to, basically, if you want to have a high quality of life, if you want to be a rich country, you've got to do stuff like this. You can't just sit and be stagnant for decades. Otherwise, you'll turn into a poor country, like what happened to Argentina.
I'm going to show you the next slide. Is going to demonstrate just what you're talking about, what regulation does. This is 2000, the regional split of global top 100 firms. And look at Europe, right there, neck and neck with the Americans, and Japan up at the top of that food chain, and China there next. And you know what I mean? Like Canada doesn't show up on this map here, but now look at 2024. 24 years later, look at this chart. Where's Europe?
Yeah. That's what stagnation does. I mean, look at Japan as well.
Regulation, choking it off, right? Choking it off, and same for Japan, right? Just choking it off with regulation, and like when they talk about AI in Europe and they talk about AI in Canada, they talk about how they're going to regulate it. They don't talk about how they're going to advance it.
Yeah, and I just think the West, and Europe was in charge of this almost. Europe were like the first to arrive after the Second World War, where they just got so complacent and they were so sort of happy with their little lives, and they just didn't want anything to change. They just wanted things to go on being kind of cool and just regulate things, and they thought that they could make a little utopia, and that chart tells you what happened to that dream. They thought they could make a utopia, and all they did in the end was create a stagnant, decrepit continent that is on the way out, disappearing from view.
I want to point out a couple of things in this chart that don't stick out just as that easy. If you look at the United States, it's tremendous growth from $5 billion to, or $5 trillion to 28 trillion. And the Europeans basically stagnant at that 4 trillion, right?
Yep.
But the Chinese, have gone from 102 billion to, 2.5 trillion. And I'm going to tell you, if we look at this chart, probably in 5 years, it's going to be the Americans and the Chinese at the top of that chart. And the Americans are going to pull way, way, way out in front with some of the greatest technology minds are investing huge amounts of money, billions and billions of dollars into this next AI revolution that's going to change the world, transform the world.
Yep. And it's the same, by the way. I mean, this isn't like selective statistics or anything. It's the same if you look at GDP. It's the same if you look at GDP per capita. It's the same if you look at median salaries. It's the same across the board. Europe just gave up. It gave up. It stopped trying to innovate, stopped trying to grow, and it just decided that it was going to regulate everything, and it was going to care about things that it considered to be more important, like the environment and emissions and migration and all kinds of things like that. They thought that they could shift over to those social concerns, and they just took for granted that they were always going to be rich, because it's like, well, obviously we're Germany, we're France, we're Britain, we're always going to be rich. And now look at this. I mean, you can look at these statistics, that's one thing, that's abstract, but you could also just go there, go somewhere like England. Don't go to London, go to the secondary cities, and just look at how poor that country is now. That's decades of stagnation. That's what it does to you. It means that you become a poor country. And that's kind of, they're our neighbors down there. We're plugged into their economy, the Americans. They figured out a way to keep growing. It's up to us now to look at them and say, what do we want? Do we want to be like them, or do we want to be like the English and like the Germans as they stagnate?
I mean, there's a lot of people out there talking about the lost decade in Canada already because of the suppression of our natural resources. And the Liberals and Jagmeet are talking about how we need to utilize our resources. But I mean, they had 10 years to utilize our resources when the world was begging for them. The Europeans were begging for LNG.
Yeah, and the Koreans and the Japanese, they all came knocking, didn't they?
Yeah. And now, just because it's an election, they're saying, oh, we should use our resources. But what you hear in the background more so is about, well, we can talk about that later, but this chart is so telling of what's going on in the world. And you should look at that and study that chart, those two charts, and just look at it and see what's happening. And those are the facts. That's what's happening.
Yeah. I mean, as well, I just one more point on that. When the Germans, particularly, who are like in some of the worst, they're in like one of the worst situations. When the Germans came to beg Justin Trudeau for LNG, they sent a chancellor. They sent it was the sort of like diamond package for visits. It was like absolutely everything that they could do. They came and begged and were told, no, there's no point. It's not worth it. I mean, as we see Germany now, supposedly one of our dear friends, as we see them stagnate and they're so desperate for energy, which the Americans and the Qataris sell to them for a lot of money. I mean, that's got to go down. That particular one, that German one, that's got to go down as one of the craziest moments in the history of Canadian politics, I think.
It is probably one of the biggest missteps for sure. And then what they did to Alberta, like again, we're talking about that older tweet from Karina Gold. Basically, their idea was to landlock Alberta's resources, and not even, I mean, they've done that. They haven't allowed an Eastern pipeline. I mean, they basically tried to suppress whatever you want word you want to use there for those oil Alberta's riches, Canada's riches for that matter.
Yeah, I mean, and they did it because I think it's because these people, they don't like machines, they don't like loud noises, they don't like having dirty hands and seeing like oil on the floor and stuff like that. I think it's just like a lot of it's kind of like a cultural thing. They just think that that's like gross and dirty, and it's like, I'd much rather sit in an office and like, type away. And I think it's that kind of disconnect, and it's that total lack of understanding of reality and the real world. But Donald Trump is almost like a force of nature in some ways, and he's like the reckoning. He's come now and he's slapped the bill on the desk, and now all of a sudden, David Eby, Justin Trudeau, and so on, now they live in this, now they live in reality again, and now it's like we're all about energy now, apparently. So they've just realized this.
Let's talk about David Eby. British Columbia used to be neck and neck with the Albertans. No, not that one. It used to be neck and neck with Alberta. BC is going the wrong way and Alberta's going the other way. But like some of the policies that they've done, and if you look at our forestry sector and all kinds of things, it doesn't make a lot of sense. And this is the reaction. It says that we should think twice about spending money in the U.S. because like we should be punishing the Americans for that. Not a lot of Canadians want to go to the United States and spend money because our dollar's so bad. You know what I mean? Like I was just in Las Vegas, $20 for 2 black coffees in Canadian dollars.
Yeah.
$20, right? For 2
Well,
black coffee.
Like we were saying earlier in reference to those charts, American salaries, they've kept going up over the last sort of 20 years, whereas they've stagnated in places like Canada and Europe, to the extent that like when the H-1B discussion in the US about Vivek Ramaswamy and Trump and how there was like a disconnect about how much importance they wanted to place on the H-1B visa. There was a huge amount of discussion about that. And the Americans were having these conversations where they were saying, you keep telling me that H-1Bs are for really high skilled workers. But look at this. Here's somebody that has an H-1B visa and he's only earning 75,000 US dollars a year. Like, how pathetic is that? 75,000 US dollars, that's like 100,000 Canadian. That's like a really good salary in Canada. But in America, that's like, how are you supposed to live on that, mate? And then that explains why coffees are like $20, because they're living in a completely different world. They're living in a much richer economy.
Yeah, they're all good at marketing. I'd say the NDP and the Liberal, because if you look at even in the placard in front of them, stronger BC for everyone. That couldn't be further from the truth. Like if you look at the stats say no. That doesn't. It's like all the policies direct you to a weaker BC, weaker GDP, weaker, like higher inflation. We talked yesterday about just an additional tax for Airbnb. Like you basically trying to choke Airbnb completely out, and that's usually. And I did the interview with the Airbnb top guy in Canada. And he said most Airbnbs in Canada, 90% of them are owned by, like they only have one. And so they're choking off the small guy, and hotels have seen a huge jump in rates. And so not great for the consumer.
Well, and that's what one sort of big event kind of drew attention to it, didn't it? It broke the system. The Taylor Swift concerts in Vancouver broke the system to the extent that it's literally put BC's inflation rate #1 in Canada, and it's like Statistics Canada pointed to that as the main reason for BC's increasing inflation rate, because one woman came to perform a concert in Vancouver and there wasn't the supply of accommodation. So as a consequence, the prices went through the roof, up like 60% or something like that. It's kind of, that tells you, and it's one of those kind of events that like shatters the illusion, I think.
Yeah, BC didn't just have that 1 month lead in the inflation in Canada. We've had several months of it.
Yeah, but it did. So that's true. It goes back to the summer. But that was kind of one event specifically in relation to the availability of accommodation. That just proves that, it's like when you put pressure. It's like you put pressure on a weak point of a wall or something like that, or a defensive system, and a bit of pressure was put on it there on the accommodation supply in BC, and it just fell to pieces. It smashed into pieces.
This story is from Blacklock. So like I said, we have that arrangement now with Holly, and we can talk about some of these stories. Guilbeault turns on the fuel tax. Obviously he turns because anybody running for the Liberal leadership, it doesn't want to do the unpopular carbon tax. but he doesn't take, like consider that the Canadians didn't like it because it's crippled our economy and driven down our GDP and all that kind of stuff. He blames all of this. When the reporter asked him what went wrong, and he said Pierre Poilievre went wrong. He lied and manipulated Canadians on the issue because for a number of years, a large amount of Canadians were in favor of consumer pricing, and through a campaign has largely lied and misled. Yeah, I think a lot of Canadians didn't really care about it. Was it a couple cents? But then you kept, doubling and doubling and doubling, and until it crippled our economy. But again, he just blames. This is the dishonesty of it, is because he's blaming it on slogans that has destroyed the carbon tax.
But it's also, I also consider that an insult to Canadians. Okay, in Gilbo's eyes, are Canadians so stupid, so hopelessly dumb and dense that one man, Pierre Poilievre, can just say a few things and then they're like, "Oh, okay, well, I now believe something else." What's wrong? Like that's such a crazy thing to say. It's such like it's a real insult to Canadians, I think, that to assume that one man talking about AXA tax, like that's it. They just fall into it's like he's a hypnotist and they just fall into a trance. It's like, okay, carbon tax is bad now. That's not why. People turned against the carbon tax, I would say, even before Polyev came along. And I would say that the main event in for the carbon tax, like for its death, was when Trudeau, for political reasons, decided to exempt Atlantic provinces from carbon tax on heating oil. I'd say that's when it really died.
So this is his one of his quotes in the story. And this is so telling. And this is the guy that's running for re-election. And this is the party. Again, don't forget that Mark Carney is a big proponent for carbon tax. He made a living off of climate change stuff. And this is his quote. As many of you know, I dedicated my life in the fight against climate change and protecting the environment for Canadians. I worked on this in my previous life before I was in politics. And in politics, obviously, it has been the cornerstone of everything, just about everything I've done. Where is Canada first in that equation? That's about him. It's not about Canada.
Well, even if you remove the eyes out of those sentences, it's still not about Canada, is it? It's still about it's about the world. It's about the global climate change rather than Canada.
And that's the danger of Mark Carney too, because they're not changing. They're going to repackage it. They say they just need to repackage it because Canadians have kind of like finally said that's enough, and now it's just we just need to rework it. Like they're not giving up on it. They're figuring out a way that they can do it so that it's just like, again, they've rebranded how many times? How many times have they
Yeah.
rebranded the carbon tax, including one MP that says it isn't even a tax, it's a levy, which is a tax.
I feel like the most recent rebrand, the final rebrand, was to try and make it seem like it was a benefit almost. That it was like something people relied on, that they needed this income. That's kind of how they made it seem, that it was almost like it was like the child benefit or something.
It's a compounding tax. That's the big difference between the GST. The GST is an end user tax. It's one tax. This is a compounding tax, and I've done this, illustrated this several times. Like on a loaf of bread, there's 50 cents of carbon tax in a loaf of bread because there's carbon tax on the wrapper of the bread. There's carbon tax on the heating of the bread. There's carbon tax on storing the bread in the store. There's the carbon tax throughout the creation of bread, from baking it to grinding it to actually taking it home in your car and toasting it. There's carbon tax added all along the way, because you know what carbon tax is on? Energy, and energy is a basic human necessity, and they're taxing it like it was a luxury.
Well, that's in that we were talking about the $500 billion investment in the US. Trump during his spiel said something along those lines where he was like, we need more energy, we need like endless supplies of energy, because when energy is cheaper, everything else in life is cheaper as well. And I know it's obviously Trump and he says a lot of stupid things, but that is accurate, isn't it? I mean, that's a complete truism. Cheap energy makes life easier and better and cheaper.
The rich nations in the world, guess what they have? Abundance of energy. Poor nations
Indeed.
have no energy, or a lack of energy, or having to get it from other people, and we've seen that. And then we all, the sad thing is, we are the richest resource nation in the world. So we should be the richest nation in the world. And we are not. Far from it.
Well, we've got we have that miraculous combination that very, very few countries in the world have, which is a huge supply of fossil fuels plus lots of hydro. So which hydro is like the best of the best, really. So we've got hydro, so we can use that for our own needs, and then we can export the oil to other people. That's what the Norwegians do. You know, that's why the Norwegians have like um, very environmentally friendly policies because they just get all their energy from hydro, and then they sell all their oil and gas and make loads of money off it. Basically, it's a great combination to have.
And I'm not a proponent for oil and gas. I'm a proponent for us utilizing those dollars so that we can benefit our Canadians. I drive an electric car. I have solar on my roof. I believe there's lots of things we can do to be good stewards of our environment, but that does not mean punishing Canadians and sacrificing it at the altar of this climate religion that Stephen Jabot is practicing.
Well, I think another way to look at it, don't think about it as being like oil and gas, like necessarily. Just think of it as being wealth. That's what it is, or living standards. Like we might sell it in a barrel or a pipeline, and it might be sort of black and gooey or whatever. But that translates to better living standards, like more doctors, better roads, more money in your wallet. That's basically what it is. Like, if you just think of it that way, it seems absolutely nuts that we would have ever said no to that, or that anybody ever in history would say no to that. I mean, obviously, the environmental question is huge, and a lot of people are very concerned about that. But I feel like we've arrived at a position now where most people realize that, and that includes Mark Carney, I would say, and some other sort of liberals, they've realized that consumer taxes and things like punishing Canadians or punishing the average person, doesn't make it any more likely that you're going to bring down emissions, and that the answer is actually technology. And the way to build that technology is to use fossil fuels in the short term so that we can have a better long term. I think that's basically what people have arrived at. So, let's
Let's move.
sign up for that.
Let's move on to markets. Again, our friend gold here looks like we talked about, a little chopping a little higher. The chart there at the end there, just like still playing in that range there. $2,800 would be the breakout there, and this is in U.S. dollars, of course. So it looks like it's flirting with that line. So this is the big moment for gold. Will it break over that $2,800 mark, or will it get sent back? And that's those tests of a resistance. Those round numbers typically work out for that. And then if we look at Bitcoin there, Bitcoin, having a tougher go. I think we probably have the wrong chart up here, but Bitcoin definitely holding above the 100,000 mark though. So that's good to see. And it's looking for a catalyst likely to push it higher. Some of those altcoins that have been selling out there, like including I think Trump had a coin that like a meme coin, and those are not coins that you probably want to bet the farm on.
Unless you pull out really quickly, in which case, bet the farm, you'll make money. Yeah, I think Trump has also made quite a lot of money out of it. But yeah, it's possible if you know that it's gonna collapse at like any minute, it's possible to make money out of it.
Those are what you call a burning match. You're holding it and you're holding it and you're telling people how great it is, and somebody takes it from you. Last person holding the match gets burnt.
Yeah.
Yeah. Netflix, huge move this morning. Huge move. Netflix, as a streaming giant, reported a whopping $18.9 million users in the fourth quarter. Revenue and earnings easily beating expectations. So the stock reacted dramatically. You can pull up that next chart there. The stock jumped about 10% this morning. You can see it there. I think it was up up 10% on that beat. Big jump though. And Netflix bottomed out there in 2022 when all these other streamers came in. You remember that Disney showed up, and I can't remember. There's a few of them. Prime showed up, and everybody showed up, and then
Paramount, yeah.
Paramount, and then Disney, like Netflix sold off into the, just under the $200 mark there. You can see that in 2022. And then since then, Netflix is like held on. And they also did that thing which really hurt them, where they said that you couldn't use Netflix, where they cut you off, where people were sharing Netflix accounts, and people thought that was going to be really bad for Netflix, and that was people were going to leave. Turns out they just sold a lot more subscriptions.
Yeah, and they've celebrated this earnings, which sort of equates to hundreds of billions of dollars, I guess, wouldn't it, if you added it all up? They've celebrated by increasing prices by considerable amounts in Canada. So there you go. There's your reward as a customer. Yeah, but I mean, I do think that we'll see. I mean, but I think they might have hurt themselves a little bit with the recent price increases in Canada because it's getting kind of crazy now. It's nearly like $20 a month now for just the basic one. And a lot of people are very, very bored of Netflix and have been for a long time, and their lack of like really good sort of movies and stuff like that because they just make their own. They make their own movies all the time now, and like 99% of them are total garbage. So I don't know. We'll see. I'm not sure that's going to be long lived, at least in Canada. Definitely not. No, I don't know anybody that does.
Yeah, I don't know too. Oh, I do know some people that still have it. They say they need it for the NHL. I said, you can get that NHL streaming app, right? Like, you can get all the games instead of just what they show up with, right? The only thing I couldn't stand about cable is that, like 300 channels, and then there's like maybe 5 good ones, and then you got to watch so many commercials to watch. It's just like, I got
Yeah.
rid of it a long time ago as well. And it was expensive.
Although Disney, they charge quite a lot as well, and yet I almost feel obliged to have it because I got children, and they put ads in to their movies now as well, and it's kind of there's something just immensely greasy and slimy and gross about these companies, the way that they try and just like squeeze every last cent. But I mean, it's the way that it's headed now, isn't it? So they obviously, like a lot of these tech companies, they come in, like Uber's another one. They come in, they supplant the old way of doing things, like cable or taxis in the case of Uber, and then they slowly ratchet it up to become just the exact same, really.
Oracle's the next stock we're going to talk about, and that relates to that announcement that we talked about with Trump and Massa with SoftBank, and Larry Ellison there with Oracle, and that stock has jumped about 10% this morning as well, based on the news of the $500 billion, a $500 billion investment in the United States. That's just the first of the stuff to come. Microsoft's already said it's going to do massive investment, same as Amazon. All of these companies are doing massive investments in the United States. But that SoftBank one comes from Japan. That is a $500 billion that's being, and again, that's coming out of Japan and investing into America. And we looked at that chart on Japan. Japan could use that investment. And where's that money going? To the United States. Why?
Well, because they don't have any resources in Japan. They can't get energy. They don't have workers. It's not the environment to do it.
And there we go, full circle, right? And, Kevin O'Leary is trying to do a deal with Daniel Smith to build a $70 billion AI center in the north of Alberta. But we shall see.
Yeah, it's going to be a real obstacle course, isn't it, as usual?
Amazon, it's going to shutter its facilities in Quebec, affecting about 1,700 jobs. That's the home to the Amazon's only unionized workforce in Canada. So that's a big blow for Quebec.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of nuts that they're doing that, but they're just going to contract other companies. So you're still going to be able to order stuff, but it's just going to come through a contracted company. So it's like you lose the jobs, but you continue to spend the money on the company. And there's a decent chance, I suppose, that'll be more expensive as well.
That's what I'm saying. It's probably going to be more expensive and flakier service, because we see this here even in Kelowna. Like, when you have other people delivering, and it's just, like there's a couple outfits that are decent, like FedEx and stuff like that. And there's a couple of like smaller ones that are just, they just throw the stuff in front of the building, in front of an office tower on the weekend. Like, do you think somebody might take it when nobody's here for the weekend? Right?
Well, if they take a picture of it on their phone, then it becomes your problem, doesn't it?
Apparently. Tesla has reportedly given suppliers guidance that they'll start to plan to produce 600 Optimus robots per week by the end of this year. And then when they build enough robots, the robots will build the robots, and the robots will build the other robots. And you know what I mean? I was just at the CES, and robots are the flavor of the day for sure. We're going to see a lot of bipeds out there in the next little while.
Well, if that comes off and it is the case that, you can have robots building robots or doing other things, then I would actually become a bit more bullish on Japan since we were just talking about Japan, because their biggest weakness is demographics, because they've just got loads of old people and they don't have any kids anymore. Same with Korea. But if they could just have an army of robots to build their Hondas and whatnot, then yeah, maybe they'll escape.
Sam Altman, we talked about earlier too. Sam Altman is just telling people to chill. He says Twitter hype is out of control. We're not going to deploy AGI next month, nor do we have it built. We do have some cool stuff for you, but please chill and cut your expectations by like 100. People are getting ahead of themselves for sure, right?
Yeah. Well, you can't blame them, because it did seem to just come out of nowhere, didn't it? ChatGPT and like
Yeah,
that sort of revolution
and
last year, a
it's
couple of years ago.
changed my behaviors, changed yours. Like, how much do you use Google versus because Google was a mainstay, and then I rarely go to Google.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was like I felt reliant on Google, like a lot of people, but I despised it because it was so useless. But I just couldn't get out of the walls that it built around my life. But ChatGPT allows you to escape and actually get an answer to your questions. So you can ask a question on Google. I mean, anybody can experiment with it. You can ask it, even like a pretty basic question like that would return a factual answer. Something about like oil and gas production in Canada, let's say, since we talk about that quite a lot. And you just like, there's no hope. It's just garbage, isn't it? Whereas you ask ChatGPT, and even if it's not a perfect answer and that clear, you can keep saying, all right, do this, do this, do this, and ask for sources and things, and you actually do get an answer. It's so much better.
Yeah, it's again, it's like like the comparisons between Google and some of those things and ChatGPT are massive. But I know Google is trying to get their Gemini up to speed, but they had a couple missteps with Gemini as it first launched. When they were trying to rewrite history and different things, right? Because they had all these other things they want to try to build into it. And X is really pushing itself out there too, right? So there's lots of this stuff happening out there. So in their EV world, we just have one. I watched this morning, and it looks like a lot of police departments, after watching what happened in the fires of San Francisco too, and how cyber trucks and that were used to help in the emergency response. There's this company out of the states there that upfit these police things, and they had a bunch of police forces out there testing them, and they said a lot of I watched some of them, and they're saying how they didn't really like electric vehicles, and they thought they didn't do this and didn't do that, but after testing them for the day, they're just like, why aren't we driving these? So
Yeah, well, I mean, it seems to almost be built for the police if you think about it, with like, because aren't they? They're not quite bulletproof, are they? But they're like resistant
the
to a lot of
Cybertruck
things, a lot
is
of damage.
the Cybertruck. The doors are bulletproof, and the side panels are, not the glass. But you can put extra glass, but then you can't roll down the windows.
Yeah.
But they did a bunch of pursuits, and then they were catching people, just because the acceleration in EV, that as well from driving one, is just instantaneous, right?
Yeah, and you could outdo any sort of bad guy, couldn't you? Unless they were also on a Tesla, I guess.
Maybe when the bad guys figure out that Tesla's the vehicle of choice.
Yeah.
Because like the police were driving those big Dodge Chargers for a long time because they had some power, right? But yeah, so
Yeah.
more and more police, especially with what happened in a couple of the emergencies, like again the California fires. Like there's a lot of Cybertrucks that were put into the field because they became an energy source. We talked a lot about energy in the show. They became an energy source, also a communications hub, because they were outfitted with Starlink from SpaceX. So these trucks were basically kind of like command posts out in where all the infrastructure is burned down. So if I was a police department or an emergency response, why wouldn't I want one, right? Because they're all in, like, there's 8 cameras around them. Everything is kind of like ready to go out of the box. You don't have to kind of create it yourself, right?
Yeah. Well, that's the power of technology, isn't it? And that's what's so cool about having Elon Musk. He's a bit beleaguered these days, isn't he? Being attacked from all sides. But that's something that's very cool about Elon Musk, is that he is like an engineering nerd, isn't he, in so many ways? And he's got his hands all over this, where he's like, he wanted all these cool little features. And it turns out that, they're actually very useful, as well as sort of as well as cool. They're actually really useful.
lot of people that have come to the defense of Elon Musk, including the ADL and stuff like that, but some of the media out there is still going after him, accusing him of being a Nazi. But again, just kind of a weird messaging for sure, right? Like, finding a bone to chew on, I guess, some of the media outlets, and just going hard
Well,
on it, right?
he's extremely powerful, and you can't be that powerful without making a lot of enemies. And I think that's it, really. That explains it. So any opportunity that these people get, they're going to take it to try and knock him down a peg.
Yeah, it definitely is weird to see that one as how much play it got, because it's a nothing burger, and it turned out to be like what they thought was one of their big things, right? So, and again, a lot of that stuff turns out like that, right? Then they grab something like that and just go hard on it.
I think it backfires, and that, it partly explains the whole Trump phenomenon, really, is that they tried many times to get him on things by telling lies and by trying to deceive people. Like the fine people one, that's possibly the most famous of all of the attempts at deception, where they tried to say that Donald Trump called white nationalists fine people. But like lots of people nowadays can just watch the video, and they could then. And I feel like they watched the video and they thought, wow, like I've just been lied to here. Like MSNBC lied to me here. And I think that in the long run, that rebounded really, and it reflected very badly on
And I would
MSNBC
say
and
that it
other
affects our
organizations.
industry as well. And I hear it a lot from people that they don't trust media at all. And this, a lot of that happened during COVID. And when media all of a sudden feels, that their job is to uh, push out propaganda and different things as opposed to truth. When the trucker convoy too, and without any basis at all, blaming it on the Russians, because Russians was the flavor of the day in the United States. Blame everything on Trump with Russia, and like I think Rosie Barton with CBC saying that Russian money was involved, with no proof like Russian money was involved. Right? It was a bunch of small donations from people across Canada.
Yep, and then the other one would probably be the Hunter Biden. That was almost like the end, really, wasn't it? That was like the last hurrah, where they censored the Hunter Biden laptop and tried to claim that was also like Russian. That was Russian disinformation or something like that. All false, all nonsense.
One of the outlets in Canada was that the Pierre Poilievre interview with Jordan Peterson was funded by Russia. And I mean, you and I laughed about that and say, what did they fund? The microphone, the plane ticket, was a podcast, right? So what funding was required?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, though, I think a lot of the people that were making those claims over the last sort of 5, 6 or more years, they thought that it was consequence free. They thought that it was like a free hit every time. They could just do it and get away with it, and there wouldn't be consequences. But unfortunately for them, there have been enormous consequences. And a lot of people now, maybe a lot of neutral people, let's say, might be looking at it and saying, these people, they pushed and pushed and pushed so much that now it's going in the other direction, and it's going to actually, the pendulum is going to swing back, and it's going to be a problem in that direction now. And now we're going to see things that maybe shouldn't happen because of how antagonized sort of like the Trump people have become.
And I think, one of the things that Stephen Smith, he's a commentator, typically a liberal or a Democrat, said that all the immigration problems that the United States is now facing, people screaming that they need to let people in and stuff like that, that he didn't blame it on Trump. He blamed it on the open borders for the past, 4 years, where they let 14 million people into the United States undocumented. And he said, well, of course it has to stop. I mean, basic Americans are getting access to services, just like we say here in Canada, right? We can't get access to healthcare. Free healthcare you can't get access to.
Yeah,
37% of Canadians don't have a family doctor.
yeah. I mean, it's blowback, isn't it? That sort of favorite term of the CIA. It's blowback. They pushed and pushed and pushed, and they screwed a lot of things up. And then, because we still live in kind of democracies, people voted against it, and there's been blowback. And now it's almost like there's time for revenge now, isn't it? It feels like revenge is in the air.
Yeah, the meme of the day has got to be, if we could do a cartoon of it, the carbon tax, like you said, like it's an insult to Canadians, where Stephen Jabot blames the failure of the carbon tax on Pierre Poilievre.
Well, that's Trudeau's been barking up that tree for quite a number of years now as well, where he kind of like, and he was doing that with COVID, and he was doing that with the Ottawa truckers as well. As it was like he was making it seem like there were just all of these gullible people out there that were incapable of original thought, and that literally all it took was one person on Twitter or something like that, and that would persuade masses of Canadians of something that is false. You know, it's like that isn't really how our species works, is it? And I think maybe Trudeau is being punished for that, for holding on to that perspective.
Yeah, another one that it affects us is that Bill C-18 is still out there, and it is compromised media. Many media outlets have gone under. We've done a number of stories on it, and then the other ones are, you know, like basically now surviving off the hand of government, and then maybe that's part of the reason why, you know, we don't have people really calling the national media calling out the Liberal government, because you know, it's their survival's at stake as well.
Yep, and then you know there are a few that are quite antagonistic to the Liberals and the government. I mean, I think of Rebel, who's they're a bit of an odd one, really, aren't they? They're sort of very editorial, but like, you know, they've had many examples of kind of been refused access to press conferences and things like that. I mean, that doesn't do the government any favors, really, does it? In the long run, or the Liberals rather, to like just block people that hate you.
Well, Mark Carney did that. He refused the Western Standard and Rebel News access, and somebody else access to his big press conference when he rolled out his nomination. They
I mean,
told him,
you've got to have that. You've got to have these people that are willing to confront you and that don't like you. It's kind of that's sort of like the whole point of a free press, is that you might have people that you dislike, and you might not even think that they're journalists in your mind, but it's not your job as the government to decide who is or isn't a journalist, because then you can just say people that don't like you aren't journalists, which is precisely what, unfortunately, which is precisely what the Trudeau government has done, and that is no way to run a free society.
It's compromised our whole media industry, and I've seen it. We've seen, you know, like major outlets, you know, like basically on bended knee, right?
Yep, totally, yeah. And you know, you don't bite the hand that feeds, do you? And I think that's part of the CBC story as well. And a lot of people have wondered why CBC appears to be so friendly to the Liberal Party overall.
And even though they're getting funding, it's never enough. Look at Global's position, right? And look at CBC and needing more money. It's just more money, right?
Indeed.
Indeed. And we get zero, just to point that out. We get zero. So there you go.
Yeah.
That's been a long show. So lots of energy, one of the key things in this one. We thank you for watching Kelowna Now, and we appreciate you.
We don't just report the news, we live here too. We're your neighbors, bringing you stories that matter to all of us. No government funding, no outside influence. Kelowna Now, local, independent. News you can trust.